Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar for COVID-19 legal updates for legal family matters, tenants and landlords, real estate agents, property developers. On our panel today, we have Jamal Sahib, Johan Miller, Roman Chus, Eddie Smith, and Anton Hamann. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Jamal Sahib, entrepreneur, business coach, and author. Jamal, thank you. Over to you.
Okay, good morning and welcome everybody. I think it's been a couple of weeks since we've last had a webinar, and I've actually missed all of you guys. I hope you've missed us as well. I think today we'll get going quite early, and instead of waiting till 5 minutes past 10, we'll get going immediately and we'll start to warm up. We have a full panel today. So as you've seen on the panel, we have Johan, Roman, Eddie, Anton, and myself. Let's start this webinar as we always do with a bit of an introduction. So for the people that have joined a webinar with us before, you would know that Snyman de Jager is a legal firm, and myself, Jamal Sahib, I run a firm called Africa 32 Business Consulting and Coaching, and I operate more in the business space. And Snyman de Jager approached me a few weeks ago when we've actually been doing some work together, and they asked me to run a series of webinars to add value to their clients. So their clients in different parts of their business, being real estate agents, as well as people involved with property and property transfers, etc. And we decided in the middle of COVID, or at the start of COVID, that one of the key things that we would do was to help people along this COVID journey. And as we waded through it, we thought it would be critically important to add value to people wherever we could. So from a positivity perspective, we decided we would work together, bring people together, once a week for 3 weeks in a row. And now after a few weeks, we're doing today's one. And the idea was Snyman de Jager really wanted to give back, and give back to the people that they've been working with for many years, and to other people as well, that they could add value into their worlds. So these webinar series were built with the intention of motivating and helping people through the COVID process, but as well as educating people and helping people grow during this weird time in history. So I usually start a webinar with a brief COVID update. And I always tell the story of why I do that. And many years ago, I was a mine manager for BHP Billiton, and BHP Billiton at the time had more than 100,000 employees globally. And this was in the probably around 2010, 11, 12 in that space. And at the time, mining related injuries and deaths was a huge thing. And BHP Billiton globally then became, people said that as an organization, we were obsessed with safety, but we maintained that we were just passionate about it at the time. But we would start every single meeting in BHP Billiton with a 3 to 5 minute safety talk, if I could call it that. And we would talk about something safety related or employee related. And what that did was, at the start of every single engagement or meeting, if you set aside that 3 to 5 minutes of time to talk about safety at the time, it created a mind space for people to understand exactly what safety meant in mining, what were some of the risks that were happening at the moment. And there was a point in time where globally, the organization did not have a single fatality in mining anywhere in a period of 1 year. And it's something that's not really heard of in that industry, but as an organization, it was achieved. So similarly, I think COVID needs to become a part of our lives. Understanding what's happening in the world needs to be a part of our lives, but we also need to be cautious of the fake news and the scaremongering that happens, and the stories that are circulating on media about microchips. And so that's not the space I want to operate in. I want to operate in a high-level factual conversation around the information that's available. So let's just look at the statistics of a few countries, which is what I do when we start. If you look at globally, there are more than 5.8 million positive cases for COVID, meaning people that were tested more than 5.8 million have now been tested positive with COVID. From that, 357,000 people globally have died in the last few months with the coronavirus, and more than 2.5 million people have recovered. Now, if you look at the USA, 1.75 million positive cases, and their population is about 330 million, and about 102,000 people have died with the coronavirus, and about 500,000 people have already recovered. If we look at Italy, which has an aging population, Italy has had more than 230,000 positive coronavirus cases. They've had more than 33,000 people that have passed away with the virus, and they've had about 147,000 people that have recovered. Now, let's look at South Africa. So South Africa has a population very similar to the size of the population of Italy. However, we have a younger population. So our populations are similar in that they are between 55 and 60 million people. South Africa has had about 26,000 cases, positive test cases of the coronavirus. We've had about 550 deaths so far, and more than 13,500 people have recovered from the virus. So it's important to note that the number of deaths that we've had due to the coronavirus in the last few months is less than the number of people that would have died on Easter weekend on the roads in South Africa had we had a normal Easter. Because on Easter weekend, we have more than 1,000 fatalities on South African roads in that Easter period. And with COVID, we've had 550 fatalities. It's 550 too many, yes, but we need to get perspective of this. So I think as a country, you know, we've been fortunate. We've managed to somehow contain this pandemic, be it because of climate or weather, be it because of, you know, our early lockdown of the country. The reality is that we've had way fewer fatalities due to COVID than most other countries our size. However, the impact on psychology, the impact on the economy, the socio-economic impacts of COVID have been massive in South Africa. And we need to be conscious of this so that we can wade through it and rebuild our economy and our country. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a brief discussion around where some extroverts find themselves and where potentially some introverts find themselves, and how COVID is having an impact on them and why. So just a brief conversation around that. Then we're going to talk a bit about business success. We're going to talk about a bit of conscious awareness, and then we're going to move into an awesome panel discussion where people have sent us questions, legal questions, that they would like to have answered by our legal panel, and I will facilitate that conversation. So I will ask our legal experts the questions that we've jotted down. And then if you have questions that you would like to have answered, and we have some time at the end, please, during the conversation, type into the chat box your questions. And if we have some time at the end, 10 or 15 minutes, we'll pick up some of those questions and answer them live as well. Okay. So these are the stages that we've gone through since COVID-19 appeared in our lives. We plunged into what they call the fear zone. People were complaining frequently. They were scaremongering. They were spreading emotions related to fear. They were spreading messages on WhatsApp and Instagram, Facebook, stuff that wasn't vetted. A lot of it was fake. A lot of it was not fake, but was just unnecessary. And then we pulled people through different mechanisms. We pulled people out of the fear zone into what they call the learning zone. And in the learning zone, people then became more aware of the situation. They became more aware of the virus itself and what the statistics around it were, and what were some of the things that could help you avoid getting sick, and reducing the probability of infection, etc. And also what was happening in your business, starting to learn and understand and be more aware of those things. And then we moved into the growth zone, probably in the last webinar of the series. And that's where we still find ourselves today. We'll be more appreciative. I think there's more gratitude going around. I think there is a bit more patience than a few weeks ago. However, I think the patience is also waning thin. But we find ourselves now in the growth zone, and that's probably the best place to be right now, because we need to learn how to deal with the world that has changed significantly over the past few months. So let's talk about extroverts and introverts. And in my book called Start with the End in Mind, one of the things I talk about or I speak about is knowing yourself. Now, in order to be successful as a human, in order to be content as a human, you need to understand yourself. So who are you really as a person? Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Are you a red-capped army general that just needs to get stuff done? Are you a yellow-capped, people-oriented person that is a people pleaser and don't want to hurt anybody's feelings? What are your characteristics as a human? Because as we are different as humans, we have different characteristics, different things also impact us. So I myself am an extreme extrovert. What does that mean? I have large social networks. I enjoy being the center of attention at times. I tend to think out aloud. I make quick decisions. I gain energy from being around other people. Note, I gain energy from being around other people. That's how I fill my bucket of energy. I'm outgoing, enthusiastic, and positive. I thrive in team-oriented and open work settings. And I often say, if you want to kill me, you don't have to do a lot of work. You could probably just lock me alone in a room for a very, very long time, and I'll die on my own. Because I need to be around people. I get my energy out of people. Now, people like me that are extroverts would right now, more often than not, be struggling in the middle of COVID-19 because we are seeking social connection in a world where it's a limited commodity. So I need to be sitting in a coffee shop. I need to be sitting in a mug and bean and having the buzz and the energy around me. So I can tell from the people that are on this call, there'll be many other people like this that are stuck in a world right now where you are missing that social interaction. You know, I spoke to a really good friend of mine the other day, and he said, you know, Jamal, I must tell you, I think this lockdown has turned us into criminals, even though we're good people. And I said to him, why? He says, man, you know, the other day, after 6 weeks of being alone at home, we were naughty and we snuck off to a friend's house, and it was, you know, it was instead of just myself and my wife, it ended up being myself and my wife and, you know, my friend and his wife, and we had a small bride together. So we actually broke the rules, and you know, we feel like criminals now, but we really, really needed this. So I'm not promoting any of that because obviously that comes with risk. But what I want to say is that we need to find ways now, if we are extroverts, to find that social connection in a different way. We need to also train ourselves and our brains and our minds to allow us to get that social interaction in a different way right now, without putting ourselves at risk and exposing our friends and families that live with us. We need to find a way to do it. Okay, so let's look at an introvert. So what is an introvert, and why would an introvert potentially be struggling right now? So an introvert is somebody that enjoys spending time in solitude. They don't prefer to be the center of attention. They value close one-on-one relationships. They think before they speak, well, most often, but they are not as talkative. They need alone time to recharge and reflect. They prefer working in quiet, independent environments. They deeply focus and think about specific interests, and they can quite often be seen as reserved. Now, introverts all over the world are struggling right now because the home is no longer a place of refuge for them. But the home is now a place where everything needs to happen: social, work, family, and where an introvert would usually come home to have a bit of alone time and, you know, time to think and be quiet and independent. The home is not that place anymore. There's homeschooling going on quite often in the house now. Kids are all over the place. Living partners are there all the time instead of, you know, being in a different work environment. And we find that many of my clients that are introverts are really struggling. So yes, they love their families, or they love their friends, or they love their living partners, but it's not the same, because they're longing for that peace and quiet that they previously had, which is not there quite often anymore. So we need to find ways right now to allow for these introverts as well to be able to get what they need to maintain their contentment, a place where they can recharge, a place that's independent of other people and work and homeschooling. So we need to be conscious of the needs of other people. Now, quite often we find that we live in a home, or we're in a relationship, or we find ourselves in a space where people are different. One person might be an introvert, the other person might be an extrovert. And the introvert won't understand the need of the extrovert, and the extrovert might not understand the need of the introvert. But we need to start to understand these things and find ways to accommodate each other in this world that has changed so significantly the past few months. So that's just mental space, mental state, which is an important component of life. It's an important component of business as well. And we need to be conscious of that. Moving away from the personal space and moving into the business space, we also need to be conscious of the fact that we need to redo our marketing strategies, because maybe our marketing strategies were revolving around newspaper adverts. Maybe our marketing strategies were around printed, I know the estate agents quite often like to put together printed booklets of houses that aren't shown a weekend and hand them out to robots. Now, the world has changed, and I'm not so sure I want to take a flyer from a guy at a robot like right now, because I'm not sure what risks come with it, and if he's sanitized before he touched the papers. And so the marketing strategies would need to change, because many of the old marketing strategies that we used may no longer be relevant, right? So, for example, billboards. If you had billboards in certain areas, and the last few weeks and months, those areas were not as highly trafficked as they used to be, then we need to relook at that marketing strategy and understand, is it worth the spend? Is it worth spending 25,000 Rand on a billboard when the traffic that passes it is 20% of what it used to be? And we need to relook at those strategies and renegotiate and remarket, or find different alternate marketing strategies for stuff like that. We also need to redo our business numbers for this year, as they will be completely different from 90 days ago. So we had targets for a quarter, and those targets, they don't make sense anymore. We had targets for the year, and they also don't make sense anymore. Now, what I'm saying is that don't discount it completely. I'm saying we need to relook at the numbers, because there are some businesses out there that have exceeded their targets for the quarter. If you take, for example, food supermarkets, if you take the health industry, or people that supply PPE, their numbers far exceed their projections from a few months ago. So as estate agents as well, I think it's been much more tough to sell a house in this economy, but it wasn't impossible. So I've seen a few this week saying lockdown deal done. So well done to those estate agents that have still managed to get deals signed in this time. I think we need to get used to a different way of doing things, and the faster we do that, the better. And we need to relook at our numbers and basically do a new forecast, a new budget that will allow us to stay in business for the rest of the year, right? So we've done this for all of our businesses. For those of you that know me, I own a few hardware stores, I own a gas business, we paint houses, and some of the industries are completely shut down. Like, I can't paint a house right now, but the gas business has gone through the roof, because suddenly the temperature dropped, the gas prices dropped, so gas is cheaper, and people are spending more time at home. So we're redoing our numbers because our forecasts were inaccurate, which means that the gas that we had planned for the year is insufficient for the gas that we currently need. So consciously, we are going back to the drawing board and saying, okay, with the information that we now have, what are the new numbers for this business? And you need to be doing that as well. And I think I also need to challenge our legal friends that are on the call today. You guys have studied for many, many years to become attorneys, and I see some of you, when I read out your scripts, have master's degrees in law. But there's a business component of it, and you've spent many, many years in the legal field, and now you need to look at your business completely differently. And now might be the time to actually speak to somebody that has spent many, many years running business numbers to help you just relook at your business numbers. So those are the things that we need to start to think about. Something else that I find quite interesting is that our competition may have changed. So where previously you would be competing with a company that was very, very similar to yours, now because the world has changed, your competition may have changed. So you might now be competing with a company that's based in another part of the country, but because people have become more familiar and more easy going with using technology, your competition may have changed. So you may be, for example, let's use a random example. You may be selling office space, but now people have gone virtual. So people work out of the offices, and your competition is not other people that sell office space or renting of office space. But your competition has now changed to becoming IT companies that are setting people up with virtual offices. So you need to understand who your competition is in this new world, because people are adapting, right? And companies that were previously not even our competition have now suddenly become parts of our industry and have become our competition. So what have I been speaking about the past few minutes? I've been speaking about something called conscious awareness. You need to be consciously aware of who you are. You need to be consciously aware of who the people around you are. You need to be consciously aware of your needs. And you also need to be consciously aware of your business. So where are you? Where is your business? Where would you like to be in your business? And how can you legally add some of the missing components into your business? Because step one is really conscious awareness. Only when you are consciously aware can you start to do things differently. So that's the end of the first part of the session. Now I move into the main part of the session, which is the panel discussion with our legal experts. So I will start with introductions of who we will be dealing with today. Just want to pull this document closer. Okay, so on the legal panel this morning, we have Roman. Roman is one of the directors at Snyman de Jager Attorneys. He runs the Deceased Estates Administration and Conveyancing Department at the firm. Roman is regarded as a multinational citizen, having lived in the US, Europe, and Africa. He has a master's degree in commercial law. Welcome, Roman. Next up, we have Johan. Johan Miller is a prominent and respected property and commercial lawyer, and he has specialized in property and commercial law at Snyman de Jager for more than 20 years. Johan is passionate about the law and focuses on resolving property and commercial challenges. He has extensive knowledge and experience relating to property developments, township establishments, and commercial and contractual matters. As a director and a part of the team at Snyman de Jager, he has been setting the pace in the property industry in Tshwane and the surrounds, and together with the Snyman de Jager team has been investing a lot of time and effort in educating and growing estate agents and the property industry as a whole. The firm and his division is well respected in the property circles, and they conduct a well-established and highly successful conveyancing division, which is constantly featuring in the ranks of top-performing attorneys, doing the slogan of Snyman de Jager proud. Their slogan is, "Our experience makes the difference." Welcome, Johan. Third up, we have Eddie. Eddie is a well-respected property lawyer for more than 25 years. He finds pleasure in finding solutions to different property law-related matters. He has vast experience in property development and township establishment. Eddie is passionate about the development of people, especially people in the property industry, especially estate agents and the teams on the ground that make a difference in the property sector. Together with the team at Snyman de Jager, they are managing transfer and bond processes. And like well-oiled machines, they are constantly featuring in the top ranks of top performing attorneys in the region. Welcome, Eddie. And finally, we have Anton. Anton joined Snyman de Jager more than 30 years ago and currently heads the litigation department. He has established himself as a specialist in family law and general civil litigation. Anton serves as a commissioner in the Small Claims Court, is an arbitrator registered with the Arbitration Foundation of South Africa, and is a serving member of the Gauteng Family Law Foundation. He prides himself in putting his clients first and is always passionate in advancing his client's case. He is a well-respected member of the legal fraternity in Gauteng. Welcome, Anton. Cool, so what we're going to be doing is, everybody now understands the team's expert areas, and we have a number of questions that have been sent through to us. So what I will do is, I will move between the different attorneys and I will ask them questions, right? So that we can keep them all talking to us next to each other. So if I may ask, Johan, the first question that I will be asking is posed to you. If you can unmute in the meantime would be great. So my first question is for Johan. Johan, is there a difference between a lessee's circumstances and liabilities relating to residential and commercial properties during the lockdown period? Over to you, Johan.
Jamal, yes, thank you very much for the opportunity, and welcome to all the participants. There's definitely a difference between the residential tenants and commercial tenants, and I think the main difference basically vests in the principle that a residential tenant is in lockdown currently in the premises that he's renting. That's the important difference. Commercial tenants, on the other side, they are prohibited from accessing the premises. The lockdown regulations and the acts of state, if we can put it that way, have restricted them from obtaining access to their commercial premises unless they're part of a exempt level, which can return to office. And I think the benefit of the residential tenant is he's got full occupation and use. In other words, he's getting exactly what he contracted for, and that's important. Now, where we've got a bit of a tool in the commercial sense is that many people have compared the acts of state that we experience currently, the lockdown regulations, they've compared to so-called vis maior or acts of God. And our common law basically directs that if there are acts of God causing impossibility of performance in terms of an agreement, it absolves or extinguishes the responsibility to perform in terms of a contract. And there are a couple of requirements. The first one would be that it shouldn't be anybody's fault. Now, I think we would agree that the lockdown regulations and the COVID-19 epidemic is nobody's fault. I mean, it's obviously something that happened. Then the impossibility in terms of the specific agreement and the acts of God should be a direct result of the vis maior. That's very important, you know, not a indirect or diverted concept. And last but not least, we should have a so-called contract that does not regulate the instance of vis maior between the parties. That's quite important. So if we rely upon the common law, we will see in future, and I think Anton will add to that, a lot of litigation in this specific instance, especially between commercial tenants and landlords, in terms of which we will hear the defense of vis maior, which residential tenants will find very difficult to be successful with, because they basically sat in the property during lockdown. And that's quite important. So I think the major difference between the two is the one has full occupation, use and enjoyment of the property, while the other one does not, as a result of circumstances totally out of his control.
As a follow-on to that, Johan, thanks for that. So what legal route should a landlord go through if a tenant's not paying rent in the residential space?
Well, I think it's important to remember that a landlord is not without remedy. It's just a problem with the execution of those specific remedies, which pose a bit of a problem at the current stage. And again, out of a litigation perspective, Anton can concur. Although you are more than able and capable of addressing the defaults of your landlord at this current, of your tenant at this current stage, you can place him on terms in terms of the rental agreement. You can send him a letter of demand. You can even go as far as to cancel the rental agreement. I'm talking of a residential agreement. And you can apply to court for an application for eviction. But we have seen in level 4, and it seems as if it would be equal in level 3, that the execution of that specific order for eviction will not be possible until the last day of level 3. So there is definitely a moratorium or a stay as to evicting tenants at this current stage. And I think obviously due to the residential lockdown and the problem with movement at the current stage, that's the reason why landlords cannot execute all their remedies at this current stage, which is a major frustration for landlords, and I think a bit of a benefit for tenants who are in default.
100%. Thanks for that, Johan. Anton, would you like to come in on the back end of that and maybe some advice on steps to be taken from that residential perspective? We'll need to unmute Anton there. Okay. So whilst we get onto that, I think let's move to a question. There we go. Anton, cool, you got it.
I can add to what you
want.
want.
Some guidelines here. So if you can add to that for us.
Well, what Johan has said is very true, but in the case of residential tenants, there is a further remedy that the landlord can exercise, and that is to attach the goods on the property. It's in terms of section 32 of the Magistrates Court Act. You can go ahead and attach the property and therefore realize the property's value once you proceeded to a sale and execution. So what normally happens is you would say that you would give a letter of demand to say that you are on arrears, and if the tenant stays in arrears for a period of more than 7 days, you can ask the court for an order in terms whereof there's an attachment of the property over which you have a hypothec in any event, and you can attach those goods. And we have found that in most cases it brings the tenant to the table because his property has been attached. Doesn't have to be his property. Can be a friend's property that's on the leased premises. Any movable asset that's on the premises is subject to an attachment. So that's one legal avenue that the tenant can take to exercise his rights on the lease agreement.
And this can be done now during level 4 of lockdown.
Can be done right now. It has been done with great success. There is a page on our website where I've written an article on the steps that you should follow. But your first step obviously is to go and see your attorney. It's drafted by way of affidavit. The affidavit is taken to a magistrate, and if the magistrate is duly convinced that the arrears are in a rental, he or she, the magistrate, can issue such a warrant. And it has a huge impact on the tenant, which will now have to produce in some which way or form because his property has been attached. Not sold yet, but attached.
Cool. No, thanks for that. All right, so that's some clarity around the residential space and the rights of the landlord. And if you are a tenant and if you are in breach, I think the right thing to do, if we leave the law out of it, I think the right thing to do as a human would be to start, conversation and discussion with your landlord. And I think that is the starting point. So if you're a tenant, I think have those conversations if you are not able to pay your rent right now, but come up with plans and be, use your integrity and try and, fulfill the commitments that you make. And if you're a landlord and you're struggling, yes, there are things that you can do. And the starting point would then be to contact an attorney, and the attorney will take you through that process. In fact, I had a friend contact me yesterday that has a tenant in a residential property that hasn't paid rent since April. So April hasn't been paid, May hasn't been paid. But the most frustrating part for the landlord, which is my friend, is that the tenant has now stopped taking her calls, has stopped responding to her emails, etc., etc. So yeah, I think I'll pass over your contact information to my friend and client, and perhaps you guys can give her a hand. Next up, I'd like to direct a question to Eddie. Eddie, in the recent lockdown brought, the recent lockdown brought our deeds office registration system to a complete standstill. So now we're speaking in the conveyancing space. I've heard that electronic deeds registration systems, the electronics deeds registration system was signed into law. How can we expect development in this regard? So there's a question from somebody. They'd like to know, how does electronic signatures work now in the deeds office space?
Yeah, thank you, Jamal. Yeah, it's a huge frustration. We were brought to a total standstill. You can think of the economic impact on the property industry. So yes, the act that you referred to was signed into law on 2 October 2019. But it's not operational yet. But it formally announced that South Africa has adopted a system of electronic deeds registration. So I think that's good news. We're moving in the right direction. The act is as we can describe it, as enabling legislation. So it provides a framework to commence the development of such a system. You can imagine that it will take time. To replace the current paper and written signature requirements with electronic means. So in this process, there will have to be amendments to the Deeds Registries Act, the Sectional Titles Act, and regulations, or they might even decide to do a whole new act altogether. But the important things, Jamal, are the principles of our Property Registration Act will stay intact. So I think the first of all is our security of title, and I think that's what makes our property registration system a very strong, reliable system. If I have a title, it's pretty much 100% sure that I'm the owner of the property. So security of title will stay important. That's a cornerstone of the new Act and is also described as such. It will improve turnaround times. I think all estate agents will be happy to hear that. It will give countrywide access to registration services. So as you explained earlier, our competition has moved. The attorney in Kakamas can now also do electronic registrations when the new system is in place. And it will have extremely accurate information. So this, just to explain that the process in the conveyancer's office will stay the same. We'll have to collect all the relevant documents, get signatures. It might be electronic signatures. I'll answer another question a little bit later on that. But our process will stay the same. This will only come in when we submit the document to the registrar of deeds. And the way of examination and registration of deeds will then kick in terms of the new Act. To give you an estimate of timing when this will happen, the rumors has it that it will be in 2022. But given the setbacks that we had in the last few weeks, I struggle to see how all these things can happen in time. I have contacted the Chief Registrar of Deeds. They acknowledged my request for information, but I haven't had any good information yet. So as soon as I have information, I will obviously communicate when we can expect this to start off.
Cool, excellent. So we're moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet.
Yes.
Okay. On the back end of that, a very similar question, just in Roman's space. I see somebody would like to know, Roman, and welcome, what is the current position of wills being signed electronically in South Africa? Roman, you still muted.
There we go.
Aha, welcome, Roman.
Thank you, Jamal. Welcome to all the listeners. I think that's a very valid question. Just a bit of background. I think in some countries, the demands for wills, soared through the roof. For example, Australia, there was a demand of about 300% in spike, and that was through March alone. And we've seen through the Fiduciary Institute of South Africa that the demand for wills within South Africa also had a huge increase. So if there's one thing that the national lockdown has highlighted, is the need for South African law to recognize electronic signatures, especially with an important legal document like a last will and testament. With millions of South Africans stuck indoors and encouraged to practice social distancing to help flatten the curve of the coronavirus by staying at home, this being for the foreseeable future, the rigidity in our laws around e-signatures has really come into sharp focus. Many fiduciary institutions have been for a while now advocating that digital signatures be recognized on a last will and testament. And I think lockdown and COVID provides a prime example as to why this should be a consideration. E-signatures are recognized by the Electronic and Communication Transactions Act as a verification of a range of legal documents, for example, employment contracts, short-term real estate agreements, personal and commercial agreements. But unfortunately, last wills and testaments aren't part of that range of documents. And someone might say that at face values, this may seem to be a way to protect a testator or testatrix from potential fraud. The argument goes that a disgruntled family member could, for example, change a will to benefit themselves and then just sit in an electronic signature thereon to fraudulently amend the document. And that's exactly for the reason why wills must contain a wet signature, not only by the testator and testatrix, but also by two competent witnesses, independent witnesses. I believe in the age of coronavirus, however, it's an outdated approach. Fraud still on a paper-based approach with a wet signature. We see this with regards to a high number of cases that still come through the courts with regards to contested wills. We also see that there's this advanced and technical solutions to many of these challenges. They're made with particular digital software. They provide a date and time stamp. This enables, a regulator or court to verify the authenticity. In addition, technology has become so advanced that it's possible to add additional layers of security to accredit and ensure the validity of an e-signature. We believe that, with only 30% of South Africans having a valid will in place, we should try to make the process of drafting and updating and verifying a will much simpler and easier. And we believe, the petition goes around that an e-signature on a will make the process so much easier. And although it hasn't received the necessary consideration needed, the various fiduciary institutions within the country are appealing to regulators to address the rigidity in that law. This could be accomplished through a national order allowing for digital signatures during the COVID-19 period, and then the period directly after that. But I mean, it's something to seriously consider in the long term. But unfortunately, the current regulation on that is that e-signatures aren't allowed on wills.
Okay, so for now, we're not there yet. What would you propose as the alternative for now, where people are trying to social distance and not spend too much of time in an office too close to people? What would your suggestion be right now if one of the more than 100 people that are on this call would like to set up a will?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we saw, the challenges during level 5 was that, you know, like I said, for a will to be valid, the signature by the testator and the 2 independent witnesses must be wet, meaning they must be original for the will to be, you know, deemed valid. So you know, we were sending out communications to our clients during level 5, and although, you know, the solutions seem a bit ludicrous, but was to go to your shop tellers, you know, to your local grocery shop, and to get your signatures witnessed by 2 independent witnesses there. And then if you're in a good, you know, relationship and comfortable with your neighbor, you could request that the process happens over your boundary wall. But, you know, look at my boundary wall, and most people in South Africa, there's an electric fence there. So if you're willing to take that risk, but the only other viable solution during that level 5 period would have been signing a declaration, an addendum to your will that's signed either electronically or originally, but since in isolation you're probably sitting around with family members which are beneficiaries of your will, they can't sign as independent witnesses. So the declaration basically states that you've signed under special circumstances and that you weren't able to either sign it originally and print it, or that you didn't have the independent witnesses. And then that will allow your executor that's nominated in your will to petition to the High Court to have your will deemed valid. The issue with that, however, is that it comes at a cost. And unfortunately, to have High Court to have your will validated, you know, it can cost you up to 30,000 rands. Thank goodness we're now moving down to lower levels, and people are able to go out and have their wills correctly and validly signed.
Yeah, so if there's an estate agent on the line that's quick to the draw, it sounds to me like Roman needs a house in an estate where there's no electric fences. So you better get hold of him quickly. In fact, I think you guys should start spamming him today. Thanks, Roman. I think you need to move into our neighborhood here, man. We've got short walls here. You can see your neighbor. In fact, I think my neighbor might also be on this webinar because she's an estate agent. Okay, cool. So next up, Anton, there's something that it actually worries me, and you know, it's something I wonder about all the time. And I see somebody has posed the question, so I'm going to fire off this question to you. From a domestic violence perspective, what about people that are stuck with abusers? How do they proceed? How are they protected? What can they do right now?
Well, Jamal, the one part of the court that was open during the whole of lockdown was the domestic violence court. So it's a process that has to be followed, and it was made by the legislature as a quite simple process. You have to go to the family violence court in Pretoria, it's in Visagie Street, and you attest to an affidavit and you say what is happening. Now, it doesn't have to be physical violence. There's lots of forms of violence. It can be emotional violence. It can be withholding money from you. Then you're entitled to emergency monetary funds. But it's a very simple process. It's a short affidavit. The magistrate has a look at it. He sees if there's a case to be made out, and he immediately grants an interdict. Immediately. Of course, because you did that without the other person knowing that there's a return date on which the other person who committed the act of violence, according to you, will have to come to court to say, well, he didn't or he did commit this offense. But it was made a very simple procedure for people to go and obtain the ear of the court and to listen to the family violence. That is one part of the courts that remain open, and I'm still open and very much vibrant at this stage.
Cool, 100%. Okay, so, but what about people that don't have access to Visagie Street? I mean, people that are based in Johannesburg, they really are being, how can I say, controlled. What would be potentially an avenue for somebody like that?
Well, there's a family violence court at every magistrate court in the country. So there's not just one court open for family violence. There's one at every magistrate court in the country. Now, if you can't get to the court, well, then you have a problem because there's no interdict that can be given against the perpetrator. So I would then advise you to go to your nearest police station and to then have a criminal case opened, which has a different effect on the persons because the police, to say the very least, are not helping people who are victims of family violence as they should be. That's why there's a family violence court that is set up specifically for people who has that problem. And like I said, it's for all forms of violence. It doesn't have to be physical violence. It can be emotional violence. Like I said, even withholding money from you. Let's say your spouse, your husband withholds money from you so you can't survive financially. You can take that to the family violence court. It's open for that.
100%. Cool. So I have another idea as well. If you can't get to the police station, what you can do is you could probably phone the police station and report your neighbor jogging at the wrong time of the day. Then the police will come there to look for your neighbor running, and then you can report your domestic violence case.
Yes, well, that would be. You can phone the police and ask them to come out. They normally refer you to the family violence court. They don't handle the matter themselves. Funnily enough, I think there's a gap in our system as regard to that. But your first stop should be to go to the family violence courts. Any magistrate court in South Africa has a family violence section court that assists people who are victims of family violence.
Cool.
And it's taken very seriously.
So on the back end of that, talk to us a little bit about Rule 43 procedures and interim maintenance. So
yes,
Yeah.
Rule 43 provides people who are litigating or in the process of getting divorced to get an interim form of legal aid while the divorce is pending. Now, a typical situation would be where husband and wife are in a divorce battle and the wife needs maintenance. And pending the finalization of the divorce, she's stuck without any money and without maintenance requirements being met. Then in terms of Rule 43, she can approach the court again on an affidavit, a very short affidavit, set out her income and expenses, and her husband has the opportunity to answer to that, and the court makes a finding. Now, you can also, in this interim process, ask the court to help you with your legal fees, which a lot of people don't know. It's not just the interim maintenance pending the finalization of your divorce. It's also that you can ask for a contribution towards your legal costs. Again, a typical example would be you are in the middle of an acrimonious divorce. The husband is the one who works and who earns the money, and the wife doesn't have money to pay her attorneys and a legal team to fight a divorce for her. So she can go, in terms of Rule 43, for an interim order. So Rule 43 is always interim pending the finalization of the divorce. Once the divorce has been finalized, Rule 43 doesn't exist anymore. The end of the Rule 43. So it's an interim protection for people who still want to engage in a divorce matter, but who needs interim protection.
Cool, 100%. Thanks for that. Thanks, Anton. I'm going to move back to Johan. Johan, let's move back to the property space, because as I said, I want to keep this, just moving around from different facets of what Snyman Diaga does, because I think different people are interested in different pieces of legal knowledge today. So I don't want any of them to fall asleep if something is not relevant to them. So we'll keep moving around. Moving back into the property space, what effect has the lockdown had on registered property sales? And how will this impact on sales and the buy-to-let market post-COVID and lockdown?
Well, Jamal, I think it had a serious impact on the registered property sales. I mean, if you take a year-on-year performance ratio to property sales in 2019, specifically in January 2019, compared to 2020 January, we had a 27% rise in registered property sales. So there was really a flicker of hope in the beginning of 2020 that the property market is on the up. But the same, we had a 4% rise in February year on year, and in March a 5% increase. But then obviously COVID struck us, and the lockdown rules came into effect, and we had a significant plunge in registered property sales of about 62% in April. So, and the reason for that obviously being is that our main participants in the property process, being the estate agents, have not been able to function. So properties have not been sold for any reason, not only for investment purposes, but for buy-to-let purposes or just for pure residential moves and such. So it has a direct effect, and I personally believe that it will have a knock-on effect as well, because if you have a look at the registered lag in comparison to the registered sales, we normally lag 2 to 3 months behind the sale. So that specific knock-on effect would probably become imminent and apparent around about July, August this year. So we'll see the void that was created in this lockdown period during that specific time frame. But to come back to the buy-to-let market, I believe that the banks and equally the investors will definitely approach the buy-to-let market out of a different perspective and very more cautious in future, because where the banks have taken a certain amount into account as the buy-to-let contribution to service mortgage bonds, they will probably be more vigilant in this regard. The reason being that we've actually seen what devastating effect a pandemic like this has on each and every lessee's financial capability. I mean, suddenly lessees just do not have the funds to service the leases anymore, and that again has a knock-on effect to lessors who've got responsibilities towards their banks and financial institutions. So, you know, for a person to say that it does not have an effect or will not have an effect, I think would be unjustified. You know, I think it's also important. It's not necessarily only a downside to it. The upside would be for those people who have got funds available to still invest in property-related matters and properties on a buy-to-let basis. There will be some cherry picking to do, because I think there will be a lot of lenders who will be forced, not by choice, but by force maybe, to put their properties in the market. So that will supplement the stock in the market as such. And last but not least, I think the benefit is that our interest rate hasn't been this low since 1973. I mean, we've got a prime interest rate of 7.25, which is absolutely fantastic if you're a borrower. And that would, if you partially finance the property, would equally benefit you if you've got some funds to spare and can afford to invest in the property.
100%. And I think that as an intro to the next question is, do you have any proposals as to how we could stimulate the property market in the short term?
Yes, I think a lot of voices have been raised in this regard, and I mean, you've obviously get a lot of opinions as to how we can stimulate the market, which is probably a bit artificial, but I think is necessary because we need relief now, you know, not in future as we do now. I think first and foremost, the reason that we have a current stagnant property market is that the main role players are not allowed to come back to the market, and those being the estate agents. You know, I'm saying this with my tongue in my cheek, but I mean, we've been exempt under level 4 as being property attorneys, but I mean, our main role players, estate agents, hopefully will hear by 2 o'clock this afternoon as to whether they are allowed to come back to the market, which we anticipate will be the case. But I think it should have taken place much sooner than later. So that's the first reason. I mean, the person who puts the cog in the machine going again, being the estate agent, needs to let loose. They have to come back to the market to be able to perform. Then I think the market still allows for a drastic reduction in the prime lending rate. You know, they've been very lenient, giving us 2.5% reduction in the lending rate, bringing it down to 7.25. But, you know, I would not be surprised if there is a further even 2 percentage points reduction in the interest rate, because that would give us the immediate benefit and immediate relief that borrowers need, and that will incentivize the people, obviously, to purchase.
Yeah.
If you have a look at further possible aids, I think, and Anton can concur, I mean, for those who've been through an application for eviction, you would know what painful and cumbersome exercise that is, because we have a lack of court machinery that provides for a speediest process to take place. I know we pity a lot of the lessees, but we tend to forget about the lessors. You know, the lessors are equally battling at this current stage. A lot of them have financed their buy-to-let properties, and therefore they need to respond to their specific borrowers and financial institutions as well. And we don't have thorough machinery in place or regulations. It's a cumbersome exercise. We need to streamline that so that we have clear-cut rules and regulations to tell people this is what's going to happen if you're a defaulting tenant, and this is what you can do if you are a lessor in that position. And last but not least, I think we've got an exemption for payment of transfer duties of R1 million. So if you pay or you buy anything less than R1 million, you get a transfer duty exemption. Voices have been raised. Why don't we just increase that specific threshold up to, say, R3 million for the next 6 months or seven months? Yeah. That would obviously entice people to buy, because the argument would be it's never going to become cheaper to buy than now. So if you incentivize purchases, it would obviously also stimulate the market in this specific.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. From your mouth to government's ears, both on another 2% interest rate decrease and on the no transfer fees for the next 6 months for properties under 3 million would be fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to send the link of this webinar. I'm going to ask Tessa to send it to government, and we're going to ask them to specifically listen to this part of the webinar, and hopefully we get a thumbs up. So yeah, that would be fantastic. Eddie, over to you with a similar theme. In the post-COVID world, what trends do you expect in the property environment? Especially, how do you see the impact on residential property? So if you had a crystal ball and you were looking into it now, what trends do you see coming? How do you think it's going to look? Give us your words of wisdom so that we can be on the front end and we can use your advice to capitalize on what's to come.
Yeah, thanks, Jamal. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think we'll speculate a bit, but it's good to start thinking in a direction and see. What I've done is I've read quite wide. You get all these futurists that creates a post-COVID world, and I've read quite a bit of what they say, and then some of it makes sense. So I think a few of the things is that I agree with you on that the buy-to-let or buy-to-rent market will increase. I think millennials, it would be hard for them to afford property, and they will be forced to rent. So there's a property investor, I think, should seriously consider a lower-end market and cheaper units. They might have a good return there, especially with the interest rate, as Johan explained. So it might be much better to invest there. I think the other trend is that we've seen work from home. It's actually possible. Even for our own business, we thought it's something far off, but it actually is possible and it's working. So I think residential homes will become sort of off-site workstations. And people are beginning. I've got a friend that he's redid his whole house and the Wi-Fi and LAN cables and I don't know what. But I think some improvements like that in the house might actually improve the sellability of it and the value in a way. And designers, I think property developers designing new homes, residential homes, should take this into account to sort of integrate this working and living space. And how do you create the space there for? You talked earlier about the introvert that will struggle with this. So it's important to create spaces that can accommodate all sorts of people at home. The other thing is that I think cohabitation, different generations. So Oma and Opa will stay with their children and grandchildren. That might happen all the more. I've spoken to Aubrey Snyman from Multiprof Town Planners, and they see the trend more and more, even before COVID, where there's stress on financial means. That will maybe become more prevalent, and also in this time where social distancing is the theme. There might be a move from urban to rural areas. So I think developers should look at that rural areas due to connectivity improving and Wi-Fi and those kind of things. Rural developments might become more relevant. And then lastly, I think your commercial properties might become challenged. From home environment, as well as shopping malls. I think they'll get, online shopping. Roman is sitting next to me in the office next to me. He's doing all his shopping online. I'm shopping the old-fashioned way. I think times changes, and shopping malls and commercial property would become under pressure. So that's just a few ideas.
No, 100%. Thanks for that. So Eddie, one of the comments you made was cohabitation, Oma and Opa. Maybe a comment from my side is that when I grew up, in traditional Indian South African families, there was an unwritten rule that said that Indian parents from the 70s and 80s didn't have pension funds. Their pension funds were their kids. So they invested in the kids' education, and it was an unwritten rule that those parents would live with their kids when they were older because they didn't have a pension. So from a socio-demographic perspective, you'll find in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of Indian families had the older people living with their kids and the grandkids in one home, because that was sort of the pension plan at the time, if I could call it that. So you're saying a lot more of that's going to probably be coming back. I think we can probably do it more cleverly into the future. We consciously plan for that, and when we develop and we build in such a way that there is some sense of privacy as well, so that people have their space, even though it's cohabitation. I think that's a really clever idea. I also think the other suggestion that you made for home offices is something that perhaps you can influence, because I know you're quite well connected in the property development space in Pretoria especially, but many estates don't allow home offices as such, or official home offices. So people might have a space at home that they work out of, but on your building plan, you can't have a home office where you could potentially see 1 or 2 of your clients a day. So maybe it's something that we need to re-look at as estates in South Africa. Maybe it needs to become something as a way of the future. So when a house is built, there could potentially be planning ahead for home offices and what those would allow. So would you be able to see clients at your home office, even if you lived in an estate, and what would the restrictions be? Because if we've put people on the moon in the 60s, I'm sure we can find solutions to the safety around that as well. So maybe it's a conversation you can pick up in your circles.
Yeah, Jamal, if I could just add to that, I think what people often forget is that they would say, yeah, but the homeowners association rules is this or that, and we're bound to it, and you are bound to it. I mean, in terms of your title deed, you are bound to it. But what people often forget is that they are the homeowners. They can influence the homeowners, and they should discuss these things and amend the rules if needs be, if you can get the majority votes and stuff. But it's important that we develop in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on a 5 million rand house, your typical bond repayment is between 40 and 50,000 rand, and probably a little bit less now, depending on what the interest rate does. But you'd find that person renting office space for 15 or 20 or 25,000 rand a month. And I'm saying, what about the potential of perhaps, having a home office where you absorb the cost of your office as part of your home loan repayment? I think that's how we need to start thinking in the future. Cool. Thanks for that one. Thanks, Eddie. Anton, over back to you. Let's talk a little bit about children. Let's talk about kids and lockdown and social distancing and parents' rights and parents' responsibilities and maintenance and how does that work in the middle of COVID, and how can we find ways to deal with this in a way where we find win-win. We need to find win-win between parents. We need to find win-win between parents and kids, because ultimately as humans, we should be trying to find solutions where we get the best possible result out for everybody that's in a situation. So what's your guidance for us with respect to with children?
Children are obviously very important in any marriage relationship, and even if that marriage has come to an end, the children remain an important part of it. During the first part of lockdown, the early 2 or 3 weeks thereof, divorced parents were not allowed to transfer the kids from one parent to another. So if you had the children before the lockdown, they stayed with you indefinitely. It later then eased to say that a father who has the right to see his children every second weekend or whatever the case might be, will have the right to go and collect that child, have him or her with him for the weekend, and then return the child. Unfortunately, what we have seen during lockdown, and I get a lot of calls every day, is that fathers especially stop paying maintenance towards their children. I'm talking about people who have already been divorced. Now, that's a very difficult situation that the mother is put in, and the child has a right. There's a Children's Act that says that the child has a right to be supported financially and otherwise, and it puts the ex-wife and the mother of the child normally in a very precarious position. Now, there's only one way to deal with it, and that's to go to court. Unfortunately, there's no other way unless you can mediate in some way or form and to say, listen, but can we make a payment plan? I had a interesting matter yesterday where the divorce was finalized, and in terms of the divorce, the parties had to sell a property and divide the net proceeds. Now, the husband hasn't paid maintenance, so what he said is let's amend our divorce papers to say that when the house is sold, the maintenance that I owe you will come from the proceeds of that house. So I thought that was a very clever thing to do for the husband to say, well, I accept that I have a maintenance responsibility. I'm not earning an income, but here's a solution. And I thought that was a very good solution to say, well, when we sell, in this case, when we sell the house, the part of the maintenance that I owe the mother is taken from the net proceeds of the house. But in any other form of maintenance not being paid, unfortunately, it's normally the women that suffer because they have the permanent residency over the children, and they have to apply to court. It's the only way to happen. You can't take the law into your own hands. You can only apply to court to say, listen, I want to attach goods to the value of what my maintenance is that's owing to me, or you can ask for an order where the husband is placed in contempt of court and he can get as much as 90 days jail time. But all of these are prolonged processes, and they are normally fought by the husband. He will say that he doesn't have money. He will bring a counter application to say that he wants to reduce his maintenance. And at the end of the day, you know, Jamal, it's children that suffer. Yeah. Because the parents are not on good foot, and the children suffer as a result of that. And there's not much that the mother, and I'm talking about in general because the children are in general with the mother, can do to enforce that child's rights. And the child's rights are very important. There's an act, Children's Act, that gives value to all children's rights, parents' responsibilities towards their children, but you still have to be able to enforce it, and you can only enforce it in a court of law. So it is a difficult area for divorced parents, but it's unfortunately at this stage the only way to go is to approach a court to deal with the maintenance or the rear maintenance that hasn't been paid.
So, Anton, what about from a cost perspective? Because if it's a single mom now with let's hypothetically say 2 kids, she's fighting for maintenance for 5,000 Rand per kid per month. It's 10,000 Rand a month. And if she has to go through this process and she's already, I mean, let's say the dad is already behind 6 months on maintenance payments. So she's negative 60,000 on her budget.
Yeah.
Where does she, what is the financial possibilities? What are the means that she can use to actually enforce this? Because she's already minus 60,000 on a budget.
Well, she must go to court and get an order for property to be attached, or an order for the husband who's not paying the maintenance to be found that he is in contempt of court and that he's sent to jail. But it's a very difficult situation for a mother to find herself in. She has to spend legal fees on the whole process. I always tell my clients that it's not worth your while to spend 20,000 Rand in legal fees when you want a 500 Rand a month increase, for maintenance. Rather spend that money on your children and not on attorneys. But unfortunately, the fact still remains that the mother who's in the position where the husband is in arrears with maintenance still has to go to the court, hopefully with the help of an attorney, because you can be dominated there, and it's not a nice environment to be in. And she must do everything that she can with the help of her attorney to collect the arrear maintenance.
Okay, 100%. Thanks for that, Anton. Johan, I'm going to move over to you, and I'm going to ask you the same question that I'm going to ask the rest of the panel. So guys, just know the same questions coming for you in the next couple of minutes. Johan, what would be the 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you could give to estate agents that are on this call right now? So not just from a legal perspective, but as Johan, having been in the property industry, having been in the legal industry, what 2 or 3 pieces of advice can you give estate agents right now to help them in their personal lives and to also help them in their businesses?
Well, Jamal, I think first and foremost, I think everybody who's been in lockdown in the last couple of weeks are in dire need of human contact. So as far as possible, I think the estate agents need to get out there again, and obviously to have a visual appearance and obviously market their goods, because that is important. I think, and saying that tongue in cheek as well, I think everybody had a sufficient amount of webinars and of virtual tours, etc., but they are missing the personal contact. So that first and foremost, I think the estate agents, hopefully by the time that they hear, they can go back to the market, they can start taking our clients again to property. So I think we should take a bit of a step back as to the virtual environment and maybe have that personal contact again. Then I think it's very important and advisable that estate agents need to be very vigilant as to the marketing prices of properties, because like I said in my previous discussion, I think there will be some cherry picking based on the fact that a lot of people have to put their property back in the market, not by choice, but by force. And that will obviously saturate the market in a large extent. So the sellers need guidance. They need guidance from the experts, being the estate agents, who need to tell them you are unrealistic with regards to your price, and they should even go as far as to say that we cannot market the property for that price because it would firstly cost me a lot of money, it will cost me a lot of effort and time if we are not in a position to be able to sell your property. And I think they will be reliant upon statistics in this regard, which will surface quite soon, and which we can assist them with. And last but not least, I think that they need to take parties out to premises, and they obviously need to have that visual exposure again that we basically were deprived of in the last couple of weeks. So that's my advice to them. I think they should hit the road running, and hopefully we can get the property market moving again as soon as possible.
Awesome, thanks for that. I think that's good. That's good advice, Johan. I'm loving it because it includes getting in contact with people, and I'm really needing that right now. So thanks for that advice. So Roman, over to you. So what happens is we have these webinars and conversations, and everybody goes, oh, my will is not in place, and then after 2 or 3 hours, our minds drift and we start to think about other things. So what 2 or 3 pieces of advice can you give to people that are on this call, not necessarily estate agents, but everybody on the call, that are thinking wills and testaments? So what space should they be in right now? What advice can you give them?
Thanks, Ramal. Yeah, I think, you know, we, all of us as partners of Snyman de Jager attorneys, we constantly preach the importance of estate planning and having a valid will in place. And I think, you know, that's always been a priority, but I think the pandemic has forced people to come face to face with why it's so important. You know, everyone's attention is on the possibility of passing, and the uncertainty of life. And, you know, during the lockdown, I think a lot of people have had more time to focus on their personal finances, getting sorted, and realize that, you know, that a valid and up-to-date will is one of the most important documents as we've stated. But I think, you know, for us at Snyman de Jager, it's meeting the needs of our clients. It's imperative that our clients feel secure, that the solutions presented to them are the best. They need to trust our judgment, even during a time of uncertainty. One thing that the dawn of COVID-19 has taught us is that it's not, you know, if you're not agile, and this is a bit of more about a motivation to the estate agents and our clients, is that if you're not agile, it's going to be difficult for you to react in the best interest, one, of your family, of your personal finances, but also, of course, your clients and your business. Another lesson is that it's important to recognize challenges as an opportunity to do better. So to do things differently and still meet what you had envisaged as your vision, whether that's cultivating a lifelong relationship with your clients, or whether it's producing products and services that meets a specific need. But the advice rendered to clients regarding estate planning, their will, and how the current circumstances will affect the future should be something that instills trust from our side. You know, lockdowns presented everyone with the challenge to do things differently, and from our side, instilling trust contributes to cultivating that relationship with our agents. So if there's something we can, you know, advise you guys to do, is one, review your wills. Secondly, we've seen that 30% of people in South Africa have a valid will. That means 70% don't. Make sure to have that on top of your priority list. Make sure to relook at your personal estate planning, and come and see us to draft that valid will and make sure that that's in order. Get it off your chest, get it done and dusted. I know it's for a lot of people a very difficult thing to do because they say they'll do it later, like you said, Jamal, but it's, you know, we preach this for a reason. So while we move into lockdown 3 and you can move around, whether with permits or, you know, and not that we're advocating moving around without a permit, come and see us. Whether we do a consultation telephonically or, you know, over Zoom, we can get that document out to you and make sure that you guys are sorted.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Roman. So keep the end in mind and just find a different way to get there.
Correct.
I like it. Eddie, over to you. If you could give us advice, 2 or 3 pieces of advice for everybody on this call today in the general sense of life. You know, when I look at you, Eddie, everything looks so calm, everything looks in control. 2 or 3 pieces of advice for how we can just be calm like Eddie and have everything in control.
Yeah, you're throwing a curveball at me.
Yeah, got it, man.
Jamal, I think you know, people are financially under pressure, so I think they must go back and what I've seen for myself is that I went back and I did a budget again, and I went back to my family and said, okay, our lives has changed. How can we now adapt to this period? So I think the sooner we adapt to changing circumstances, the better. So go and evaluate your life. but with a positive frame of mind. I think it's true that there's a future, and I've read the other day that we were born to be in a time like this. So you're well equipped. I think people should go back, yeah, and stay positive, and look for solutions rather than just keep on watching negative news. This afternoon I'll be the first to see the regulations coming through and see how it affects us. But there comes a time when we must say enough of that. I'm not going to watch all the negative stuff and see how many people died in Italy or in America. Let's focus on what's important to us, our families, the people around us, and how we can sustain that environment. So yeah, that's just a few ideas.
Thanks for that, Eddie. I like it. So we'll focus on the number of people that have recovered from COVID from now.
That's a good idea. It is actually quite a lot that recovered. I think we in South Africa we were about 50%, if I've seen the stats correct.
Yeah, correct. Thanks, Eddie. Anton, over to you. If you could give us 2 or 3 pieces of advice on how to reduce the amount of stress in family matters, what would that be? 2 or 3 things that we can do to reduce the amount of fighting, the amount of stress associated with family challenges right now. What would that be?
I would say talk to each other. Talking is the best medicine. I know it's been a difficult period for a lot of people in lockdown. You are not used to being husband and wife together in the house the whole day. Normally you at work. Talk to each other, see what you can sort out. Don't rush into decisions that might have an effect on your estate, on your family, on your children, and be positive. If needs be and you cannot find a way to continue in your marriage, go see an attorney who's set on settling your divorce. Don't go into a big fight over things that at the end will not be necessary. Settle your disputes and talk to each other. That's my advice.
I think that's great advice. I think that's really great advice. The starting point is to be able to communicate, and communication has 2 parts. People think communication means to be able to speak well, but I think more importantly, it's the ability to be able to listen well. So I think that's good advice. Start the conversations and start communicating. So thanks for that. Gentlemen, I've come to the end of my time. I need to give Johan a minute or 2 to wrap up. Thank you so much for this. It really has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and I hope we've also imparted a lot of knowledge to the people that have dialed in this morning. Eddie, I think we need to do something like this again. Perhaps we should look at doing one in a few weeks' time again. I think it adds huge value. If I look at the comments coming through, people really do appreciate the time that we spend and giving back and adding value. So we should look at doing this again sometime in the future. To all of you, thank you for your knowledge, and for everybody that's dialed in, thank you for dialing in. I'm going to hand you over to Johan now, and Johan will wrap up for us. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you very much, Jamal, and to all the participants. Well, for those who don't know, it's the last of the first session of our webinars. And first and foremost, I would like to thank Jamal and his team. You were absolutely brilliant, I think, hosting it, and obviously being the host of our 4 webinars, which was an overall resounding success. I think we will definitely do it again. And if I have a look at the amounts of people that we reach in this specific medium, it is definitely the way to go. And I think it's very convenient for everybody to do it in such a way. On behalf of the board of directors of Snijman de Jager, I think the window that's currently displaying itself, you'll see that we've got a fantastic, competent team, and we can provide an array of services right throughout the legal spectrum. That is obviously from litigation to our specific conveyancing, commercial, corporate estates. So please make use of our services. We are there to serve the public, and we would love to be of service to you and to provide our expertise to solve your problem. That is the main issue, and I think, like Anton also said, is we are problem solvers. We are not problem creators, and that is the reason why we love being of service to people. So on behalf of the Board of Directors, thank you very much for all the participants and the loyal participants we had throughout our 4 webinars. It was a pleasure serving you, and we hope we can do so in future.
Thank you, Johan. Thanks, everybody. Have an amazing day. And remember, as far as possible, positive thoughts, please. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.